Thank you for inviting me into your beautiful home. So much history here. You were telling me about your kids and how much has come through this space. So it's an honor to be here for a little bit of time with you in such a private, personal space.
Thank you.
So we were just talking a little bit off mic, which we'll get into in the conversation, about this idea of authenticity and integrity. Being at Warner Brothers for how many years? 40?
Warner Brothers for 47 and a half of my 49 and a half years in the industry.
So this is unheard of. People don't stay in the same job that long.
Oh, absolutely. I did move. I did take a plunge back many years ago, about midway in my career, almost like exactly midway in my career. And after 25 years at Warner Brothers, I moved over to Universal. Actually, I was a executive for MCA at the time. And it was a seducing offer, both financially, and it was an interesting time at Warner Brothers and a very interesting, pivotal time in my career. So
in what way?
It was emotional. It was a period of time when Warner Brothers had acquired Lorimar Entertainment, Lorimar Television, Lorimar being Dallas and those kinds of TV shows, Eight is and Up, Dynasty, whatever Lorimar. I mean, I don't remember what all Lorimar did. But I was asked to join the combined new Warner Brothers Television, which was a combination of Warner Brothers and Lorimar. But I had been talked to via non-tampering ways of talking to people. So one was my cousin, one was someone else about, Universal is really considering, would love to be able to talk to you. Their head of production is retiring, and they really want somebody that has done all of the things that you have done, a little more versatile production. Universal at one time, certainly when I was active and growing up, was the king of television. I mean, they did all those Sunday television series and Columbos and things and Murder, She Wrote, and Universal was on top of the game. However, television had changed. Sitcoms had become increasingly popular. Warner's was wildly successful with our situation comedies, for which I'll get into a little bit later as to how I became a part of the sitcom world at Warner Brothers. But Universal wanted to talk to me. Truthfully, it's hard to say, but I didn't feel really wildly welcome in the Lorimar group.
And why is that?
I think because of the successorship was primarily Lorimar. And I think that their interest in how and what we did at Warner Brothers was pretty much irrelevant. I think they had their own style of management. And so it was a reasonable time for me to possibly go somewhere where I was really needed and wanted. I had to feel it out.
Yeah.
And it was a big gamble. My family, my wife, everybody was on my side. And I have a wonderful wife who you haven't met, but she said, you've got to go where you're going to be happy. And when you're happy, we're all happy. And so I did. And I spoke with the highest level of executive at Universal. And it's I probably said all the right things, but I remember Lou Wasserman, who is probably maybe one of the biggest legends in Hollywood, and there's a wonderful book for the listeners if they'd like to read it. It's called When Hollywood Had a King. Read it.
Yeah, I don't think I've even read that.
Oh, yeah.
I need to read it.
Lou Wasserman said, Steve, you've been at Warner Brothers for 25 years. And he said, but let me ask you, why after 25 years would you want to come to MCA? And I said, well, Mr. Wasserman, I only had one relative in this business. He spent his entire career at Universal MCA, and I know that you know him because he was a studio driver and he drove you a few times, and he spent the last 10 years of his career exclusively driving Alfred Hitchcock.
Wow.
And Mr. Wasserman said, you mean Tony? And I said, yes. And I said, I just got really tired of listening to Uncle Tony say, when are you going to leave Warner Brothers and go join a real studio? And Mr. Wasserman said, welcome to Universal.
Oh, my God.
I hadn't even accepted the offer. I hadn't even been given an offer.
My God.
He said, welcome to Universal. We love your uncle. And I said, well, thank you. But I hadn't been given an offer yet, Mr. Wasserman. He says, you'll get an offer. You tell those guys at Warner Brothers you're coming to work for Universal.
Wow. And you did.
See ya. And I left. And I said to my wife, wow, this was just like crazy.
Quite a difference between the reception there.
Yeah.
Than
just a little bit
than
different, right? So you can kind of understand.
Yeah.
So we got way ahead of ourselves. We
did. We kind of jumped.
We just jumped into 25 years. So anyway,
25 years at
it's
Warner
pretty
Brothers.
interesting.
Yeah.
So the 25 years at Warner Brothers was magical. As a young man, I had the benefit and the pleasure of growing up we grew up in North Hollywood. And as you can guess, in those days, which was a long time ago, the members of the film community and motion picture and television industry were scattered all over the valley. And therefore, my neighbors and classmates and friends and what have you, some of them were kid actors. My next door neighbor was the head of makeup for Gunsmoke for 25, 30 years. So we grew up in that environment.
And were there a lot of people at the time employed at the studio?
Well, interestingly enough, Warner Brothers and all the studios' home offices were all in New York. Hollywood was manufacturing.
Production.
So I was in Hollywood. And so it was literally film school. And you had the opportunity to matriculate into a number of fields from the mailroom. The studios were really small, so even as a mail boy, you could talk to Francis Coppola. I mean, we're all the same age, and you were a mail boy. Nobody expected you to be a mail boy all your life, and therefore you were part of a family. You were accepted into the quote society at the point, right? So we could talk to Francis Coppola. And you could talk to an actor. Right. And actors were, I'm sure there were aloof actors, but they were just people. Right. You could talk to actors.
Crazy. Actors are just
actors
people.
Were just regular people. And so I remember one of my first time, I was there for about 3 weeks and as a mail boy. And, I learned my route. I would take my mail to all the things. And they actually had, this really is going to make me sound really old. They had a telegraph department.
Wow.
Okay. No email, no texting, no cell phones. They had a telegraph department because telegrams came in over the wire, and you got telegrams, and you had to take the telegram. And telegrams were top priority because they were telegrams. They seemed to be important. You had to take telegrams directly to the individual, and they required a signature. So the mailroom was a way to try to understand and learn what everybody did, what all the jobs were. So one of the things that I appreciated in my opportunity in my career was to learn everybody's job, and that was one of my goals. I want to learn how everything is done. Why do they do it? How do they do it? What are the key components of what they do? I didn't need to know the technical capacity of everything, but I certainly wanted to know what that person's responsibility was on either a crew or any job at the studio, and how to do that job, if at all possible. And some had far more talent than I did in certain areas.
Mhm.
I was always fascinated with wonderful film editors.
Mm.
The ability to take all that film on a moviola at the time,
Ugh.
not digital editing. So you've got strips of film and
Yeah.
you're running it through a moviola and you're watching it on a little bitty monitor and you're putting the pieces together and you're gluing it together with tape and all that stuff. And that was one of the professions that was like, wow, that is enormously
artist.
creative. That
Yeah.
is an artist at work.
Yeah.
The same with a music editor. The music editor putting the composition that has worked with a composer with those key moments, being able to take the music strip and putting it on the film and putting it together with the editor. So at that specific moment, that one downbeat hit and just either scared you to death or made you smile or give you goosebumps.
Yeah.
Those are the artists. And for me, I figured I'm never going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
One, it was, it felt a difficult, lonely job
Mm.
in a dark room. And even though it was wildly creative, it just wasn't something that I was going to gravitate to as much as I admired it and tried to learn and spent hours in an editing room with a number of editors. It just wasn't me.
Yeah.
It was a time when I thought I wanted to be a director. That fascinated me, the ability to translate this piece of paper and this script into a visionary piece. That was exciting.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna digress, but I always felt that my job as a head of production allowed me to get into my own head and work with directors and certainly provide my opinions on the locations and how we did things and where we should do things. And certainly some of the talented people. It was very collaborative. Of course, the directors had their own ideas as to who the production designer should be or who the costumer should be. But they always wanted to hear your opinion on things if you had the opinion, or certainly after you became a veteran.
Right.
Then you were a bit more collaborative.
Yeah.
So while I didn't direct, I did have that collaborative, creative moments with the directors, so that the job wasn't totally financial. It wasn't totally just mundanely doing budgets and schedules and things of that nature. It was actually a little bit of a piece of filmmaking. And so cutting my teeth, these are the things that I wanted to do. So I had a chance because, you do want to earn money. My first job as a mail boy cleared $67 a week. That was my take-home pay. And, that was fine. I had a roommate and had a little apartment in North Hollywood, and it was fine. I wasn't like for wanting for money, but you still had ambition. And a job became available in production auditing. That's what did production costs. I did get my first shot at that, and then I got my first opportunity to do a location on a film called The Summer of 42 in Mendocino, California. It was directed by Robert Mulligan. And we were in Mendocino, California, and it was like I was really a part of a picture, albeit I was Warner Brothers, but it was like the first movie that I was doing some of.
Yeah.
I was asked to join a group to do the feasibility study on merging our studio with Columbia Studio. From a finance standpoint, I had to go in and analyze things and what have you. So it was kind of a diversion, but I did it. And I was on that group for almost 7 months. And they decided to merge studios. And once they merged the studios, I was asked by Warner Brothers, not really asked, I was told by Warner Brothers that I was going to join what was going to be called the Burbank Studios, which was the combined studio facility of Columbia and Warner Brothers, which is essentially Warner Brothers Studios.
Yeah.
And it was going to be called the Burbank Studios, and I was going to be assigned to the office of the president of the Burbank Studios, and I was going to be kind of an executive. And I'm like this young guy, right? So this is reasonably
Big step,
young.
yeah,
This
big
is
step.
71. And I joined the studio in 68. So
Yeah,
I'm
it's
in
a short amount of time.
I'm not even 30 years old. I'm in my 20s. I said, I'm going to double your salary. And they doubled my salary. So I went from, at that time, $125 a week to $250
Wow.
in one meeting.
Big jump from 67
Yeah.
where you were.
So it was like crazy, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
You're living the life.
This is cool.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to do this. And I did a good job. I got my first vice presidency after a few years and became the vice president of production services. And therefore, those departments that I learned how to do as a boy all reported to me. So the sound department reported to me, the camera department reported to me, the projection department, the operations department, the studio technical department, the sound stages all reported to me.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of cool, going from being a mail boy to learning about those departments to have the inner functions of those departments report to me. And what did that really mean? What it really meant was keep them operating efficiently, hearing what they needed from a capital improvement and repair standpoint, and keep everything running full speed ahead to service Warner Brothers and Columbia Productions. Times were changing a little bit. Techniques had been changing. You had to stay abreast of technology. Things were changing. You got to remember, we're still analog, but things were changing.
Yeah.
Things were becoming more compact and portable. Everybody knew at some point we were going to do digital. It was going to convert from analog to digital. And that was not any small shakes. That was a tough one because everything we had at the studio from an investment standpoint was analog equipment. It was fascinating. And I had that period to be able to do all that. We were then, Barry Meyer, who I showed you a picture of, who became CEO of Warner Brothers. Barry Meyer, who was the head of television for Warner Brothers. They did their first, quote, sitcom on videotape called Alice. It was with Linda Lavin. It was from Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. It was a cafe, a Mel's Diner, and Alice was a waitress, and Flo was a waitress. And they did this sitcom that was created by the writers from I Love Lucy, Bob Carroll Jr. and Madeline Davis. And I'm with the Burbank Studios, and the Burbank Studios, at the time, we had taken one of our sound stages and converted it to a, quote, television studio with dead hung lighting on scenery hoists and things like that so that we could do perhaps game shows and things of that nature. And in order to do that, we had to negotiate a contract with the IATSE to accept videotape on a film studio lot because videotape had only been done at a network facility, ABC, NBC, KTTV, KHJ. They were television studios. And here we had these beautiful sound stages that weren't being used properly. And Barry Meyer said we should be using our own sound stations. And besides, CBS is gouging us with the cost of doing this production. So we got with the IA, and I was part and parcel from the Burbank Studio standpoint to negotiate the first, what was called live and tape television agreement with the IATSE that allowed cross-pollination from film and tape. And Barry said at the time to the head of television production at Warner Brothers, so this is 81, I want to bring Alice from CBS to Warner Brothers. So we all went down to CBS. We all watched a number of tapings of Alice because we couldn't do it until the second season. couldn't disrupt it. It was already at CBS. And so Richard said, why don't you come work for Warner Brothers Television? And I said, well, I don't know. They have a no raid deal between Columbia and Warner Brothers. And so he said, well, you talk to them and see if you can get permission to talk to Warner Brothers, right? So I went down to Columbia and I talked to Johnny Beach, who was the head of feature production, and Seymour Friedman, who was the head of television production. And I said, I have this opportunity to possibly join Warner Brothers in television production to do their film and tape production. And they said, go with God. If it's something you want to do, Steve, you've been good with us, go. So I got a job it was my first television production job. I was a vice president, and they said, we can't offer you a vice presidency, but you can be a production supervisor. I was going to be executive production supervisor, give you a little more money. And I said, titles don't mean anything. I'm going to do it. I started at Warner TV as a production supervisor. The next nice thing that I got, I became vice president of film and tape production because I was valuable, and they gave me some tape shows, an hour tape show to do. We in my tenure at Warner Brothers, we created a number of very wildly successful half-hour comedies.
Oh, yeah.
Wildly successful or half-hour comedies are the ones that last, that have staying power. They had signed a deal, a long-term deal, a very expensive deal with a film producer, writer, executive producer named Reinhold Weege. An interesting name, interesting human being. He was second in command to Danny Arnold on Barney Miller. He had this wonderful wry sense of humor. And he had done a unsuccessful, short-lived series about attorneys in New York. They had done that before I joined Warner Brothers at a network, right? And Reinhold Weege was a bit of a rascal. He was a nocturnal. He would keep the show up all night, spend a lot of money. And they said, Steve, when you come over here, you're going to get Reinhold Weege, and he's a tough cookie. I went over. Reinhold Weege started another show with us that we went to a pilot, maybe one of the best pilots that I've been a part of, called Dads, and it was 4 generations of men living in a New York apartment. The dad, the son, the son's son, and it was like a baby. I don't remember. It was starring Eugene Roche and Martin Short, and not a lot of people knew who Martin Short was. It was Dad moving on, getting a date. Dad, you got to get a date. And these men, their housekeeper in this apartment was Selma Diamond, who became the old crotchety bailiff on Night Court. If you've ever seen Night Court, she was an old tough old broad that always had a cigarette hanging out of her mouth and that kind of thing. We did this pilot, loved this pilot, tested the pilot, and Martin Short didn't test well. He just didn't test well. And so the show wasn't picked up.
Interesting.
Which was a tough one for all of us. And then Reinhold Weege created Night Court. And he found this kind of wacky magician on Saturday Night Live that he fell in love with named Harry Anderson. I wanted to make him a judge. I remember Reinhold Weege went and spent New York actually had a night court, a real night court back then. And Reinhold Weege went and sat in those courtrooms for a month.
Wow.
And listened to all the cases, dragging in all the prostitutes, all the pimps, all the drug addicts, all the weird people at night, and created Night Court. Wow. Night Court was wildly successful. We then went on to do Growing Pains and Head of the Class and Murphy Brown, and just a lot of really
Friends,
wonderful
obviously.
half hours.
Yeah.
So Friends is where we started. Friends was in development when I went to Universal. I had started Murphy Brown, which ultimately went on.
Yeah. And by that point, were you already head of production at Warner
Yeah,
Brothers?
I was fortunate. I went from, this production supervisor to a vice president of film and tape. Then the head of production who hired me was let go after a couple of things. We were doing a lot of miniseries back then too, and therefore I got a chance to do Salem's Lot with James Mason, that still holds up as one of the great miniseries, a Stephen King novel. The Thornbirds with Richard Chamberlain. Richard Chamberlain was a mainstay of Warner Brothers. We had David Wolper. We did Roots and Roots the Next Generation, and I then did quite a bit more film and did the Bourne Identity, which was with Richard Chamberlain and Jacqueline Smith, and we actually did some of it in France, in the south of France.
Nice.
And so I got to take the picture of the south of France, and it was something that really opened up my horizons. It was the first real location.
Yeah.
I had gotten married very shortly after I joined Warner Brothers Television. I was well into my 30s and met this great woman, a younger woman, a beautiful girl, and said, it's time. If I let this one slide by, I'm done for. And she understood me, and she was a aspiring actress at the time, and knew the business that she was getting herself into.
Yeah.
So I was married in 82, and we had a baby right away. We had a baby daughter, and then I had a son a couple of years later. So.
Was it difficult to adjust to all of these new identities?
No, I had this great wife who said, I loved acting, but I want to be a mom, and I love my kids, and so she supported everything.
But you never felt like the demands of your job and your position as you continue to grow in the ranks of the studios took away from
we had some
your family?
We had some real kind of cool things. Is that when the kids were younger, especially when they started school, mornings were our mornings because they were easier for me. Kind of the business starts a little later.
Yeah.
There were no cell phones.
Yeah.
No emails, no text.
Good old days.
The good old days.
You just had your mornings.
So we
to
could get
family.
up in the morning and kind of start a new day. And the kids weren't really grumpy, and it wasn't like yelling at them to do homework and what are you doing? And so we got up as a family and had breakfast and hung out a little bit. And so it was dad was getting ready to go to work and kids were ready to go to school, and off we go. There is a number of periods in their life where I wasn't around as much as I possibly should have been or could have been. But I don't think if you talk to my kids that they were wildly wanton. We made a point to spend holidays together. We definitely, one of Dad's things was to go on a vacation every year. Get away. Give them all of me for 2 weeks. No playing golf, no doing this, no doing that.
Right.
Let's go on a real vacation. Go to Hawaii. Let's go to Europe. Let's go somewhere. I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. We had Dad's Night at the Movies, which was a weekly occurrence to introduce them to what I loved.
Yeah.
In the movies. We went from videotapes to Laserdisc to DVDs, and we still do Dad's Night at the Movie.
That's great.
So that I love.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful period, and it was like it's a blur right now because there was so active in so many projects and so many pilots that you adored as being part of this filmmaking process, and that you were so brokenhearted when they didn't get picked up.
Yeah.
Because you grew to know the producers and the cast, and they didn't get picked up, or when a show was canceled, and you just crazy brokenhearted.
Yeah.
Because television you became a bit of a family, like Growing Pains and Head of the Class. You can't do shows for 8 or 9 years of your life with the same producers, mostly the same directors, and mostly the same cast without growing fond of one another.
Yeah.
I spent more time with them than I did my own family.
Yeah.
And so when the show is finally over, it's like there's a postpartum there, right? It's like crazy.
I feel that even working on a feature, and that's 3-4 months of my life.
Yes.
And there's a void and an emptiness when something finishes, because so much of your existence, and we're talking specifically prep, production, and then it dies down, which is you're operating at such a high. So when that comes to sort of a screeching halt and the project moves on to its next phase, it's very jarring. It's emotionally very taxing.
I love what you just said. 4 months out of my life in the independent world,
and that's how I felt. So I can't imagine
in my
8
feature
to 9
world
years.
can be 2 to 2.5 years of my life with the director anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So between trying to do a presentation to get a film greenlit.
Yeah.
So we've scouted, we've hired artists, we've done casting, we do a whole presentation in the movie side before you even get a green light to start prepping a movie. And a number of films that I've done, the big films, take 4 to 6 months to prep the film.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, you're talking the Harry Potter series.
Everything in the Harry Potter series took even longer because we manufactured everything you ever saw on the screen in Harry Potter. Nothing was ever purchased. Like
it was all made.
Like a pen.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't go buy a
and there was no prop house to rent it from.
Pen.
Right? Like everything was so specific to that world. It had to be handmade. That's so incredible.
We made it.
Yeah.
They even actually, as crazy as this sounds, made some buttons.
Wow.
Who makes buttons? It was like when I'm the head of production and I'm going, you're making buttons?
You spent how much on buttons?
That's impossible. Who makes buttons?
Yeah.
Well, these special buttons are made on, oh, please, right. So anyway, we're kind of, it is television. So I did this television, loved this television, progressed. The head of television left. They brought on another head of television, not me, from the outside, who is still one of my really closest friends, Gary Cradle. And Gary came from the independent world, became the head of Warner Brothers Television. Thankfully, I became his right arm. And we had, in the interim, the opportunity to take the studio back and send Columbia Pictures packing to Culver City, because with the Lorimar acquisition came MGM Studios. Lorimar had acquired MGM Studios from Kurt Krikorian, and it was then Lorimar Studios in Culver City. And Columbia made a somewhat of an erroneous decision, and that was to hire John Peters and Peter Guber to run the studio. And John Peters had a contract with Warner Brothers. And so the corporate rating, there was a wild lawsuit at hand. And Warner Brothers said, we have a really interesting way to resolve this lawsuit, and that is we'll give you MGM or Lorimar Studios, and we'll take back Warner Brothers Studios, and we'll keep the ranch, and we'll call it fair and square.
Yeah.
And so Columbia moved to Culver City. Columbia had been acquired by Sony from Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola bought Columbia way back in the 70s. When they thought they wanted to be in the film business. So Gary and I were kind of asked to do an evaluation on how the studio should be run. Now that Columbia wasn't involved, it had a specific way of being operated, the way profit sharing was and all those things, and now it's all ours.
Yeah.
And so we did a special assignment amongst our other job with Frank Wells. Frank Wells ultimately was like a president of Warner Brothers corporate.
Yeah.
Maybe one of the brightest executives I ever worked with in my life, and then ultimately became co-chairman of Walt Disney later on in life, and tragically was killed in a snow skiing helicopter accident. Anyway.
And can I just pause? I want to ask, can you just define sort of quickly, what is a head of production do? What is some of the responsibilities that you have? And as you grew to become sort of head of worldwide productions before all of that, what does that mean exactly in the context of the tangible duties that you're responsible for?
Well, I break it down. I break it down in layman's terms is the easiest way. And so we'll do a comparison to Ford Motor Company. Okay, so Ford Motor Company builds cars. Warner Brothers builds movies. So the head of production is akin to the manufacturing division. You have president of worldwide production at Warner Brothers, and president of worldwide production is the, quote, creative development head. They are the creative end-all to making films. They're charged with finding the projects, listening to pitches, reading books, reading
development exec, sort of.
Well, yeah, they have development execs under them that bring these projects to them.
Okay.
But they're the boss, right? They are the guy that runs Ford that says, I want to introduce a new vehicle. We'll call it a Mustang.
Yeah.
I want it to make money. I want people to love it. Find the right people and let's design it and develop it.
And then that's when they come to you.
And blah, blah, blah. And they do all that.
Yeah.
And then they come to me as manufacturing while they're
head of
doing
manufacturing,
the design,
essentially. Yeah.
And they say, but I want to sell this car at the medium price range so that everybody the general family has access to it. But I want it to be sporty and I want it to have a V8 engine and I want it to be supercharged. And so the guy like me says, holy crap, you want to sell this car for back in the day, $10,000? It can't be supercharged. It can't be this. It's got to have this. It's got to have that. So you work with the development people to develop something within a range. And people have to understand that every film that's ever been made has a monetary value to it. Everyone, before you even budget it. Say, I'll make that movie, but I don't want to spend more than X.
Right.
That's the biggest challenge. And that was what grew and grew and grew. As I aged and aged and aged, it became a lot more dollars and cents because the corporations were far more demanding for turning that profit. They gave you wild, what felt like unrealistic expectations for net profits. And therefore, your budgets had to be tighter, a bit more constrained. It just changed. It changed with the diversity of the corporate world that we live in. And therefore, there were a number of films where we spent a lot of money developing them, number of rewrites, millions of dollars that never got made because you just couldn't put the ingredients together for the right price for it to be green lit to where it felt like a good business decision.
Right.
Because it is show and business. And we have to remember, I was part of the show, but I was a lot of the business.
Yeah.
And that was with television, no ifs, ands, or buts. Your financial constraints were everything.
Right.
They were everything. You got it. That was before television was deficit financed, which is hard to believe today because nothing is really deficit financed. The networks pay 100% for everything. Netflix pay 100% of everything. Back then, we could deficit finance the first season of Scarecrow and Mrs. King as much as $250,000 an episode. And if you did 25 episodes, a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's over $5 million, $6-7 million. We're in the hole.
Yep.
Just to have a show on CBS earning whatever they could charge for advertising, but Warner Brothers is eating
that
$5 million of the production cost in the hopes that it would run long enough to do 100 episodes to where you could
get that
syndicate
golden,
it.
the golden 100.
And syndication was everything. I don't know what the value of syndication is now. I think on the top shows like Big Bang and those, it's monster. I
But
know
it doesn't exist anymore.
it does with Two
Not
and a
like it
Half
used to.
Men. It
Well, with
does with
those,
some of
with
those.
the global properties,
It
I'd
is a
say.
global
Yeah.
property, and foreign. You got to remember, foreign when we were doing television was minuscule. It was minuscule.
Right.
We sold things foreign. They helped
Right.
the deficit side of it because it was still our property, and with the networks we could sell it foreign if we could find a foreign buyer, but it was still minuscule. They weren't paying a lot of money for it. Great Britain was a good market for it because it was English language, but it was hard. Sitcoms didn't translate, those things. There was really no money, so we were hoping and nurturing and doing so that a show would last. But once it hit the syndication market, the sky was.
It's just money coming in at that point.
There
Yeah.
when Reinhold Weege said they offered to buy Night Court from him because he had a profit participation. It had gone into syndication. And they said, why don't we just buy the show from you and we'll take all the syndication money and we'll pay you. And he sold Night Court, his participation in Night Court, to Warner Brothers for $50 million.
It's insane.
In the early 90s, when $50 million was like $150 million today to $200 million. And he sold it, and I saw the check for $50 million to Reinhold, made out to Reinhold Weege. We had a luncheon. I took the check and I put it in a pirate's chest with a bunch of chocolate doubloons and put it in there. And we presented him with a pirate's chest at lunch with a $50 million check.
That's incredible.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
So that's what the head of production does, and the opportunity.
But you're comparing, you're mitigating the risk, right? You're looking at costs, budgets, and the scripts.
Well, you're doing
and the
even
schedule.
more than that. It's still that old finance background still kicks in all the time.
Yeah.
So I prided myself as probably the best in the business, and I don't mind saying it, as to maximizing foreign incentives, state incentives, finding the right fit. You can't put a square peg in a round hole. You can't create creativity if it's not there. But if somebody wants to hand you a bunch of money, my dad told me, go stand in line. It's a good place to be. And so when you get 25% incentives, rebates and incentives, I did, and I'm so proud of it, that nobody really understood the Matrix script. It was if you think the movie might have been complicated, reading the script was unbelievably complicated, right?
Yeah.
And you could make the Matrix so many different ways. The Wachowskis had this unbelievable visual imagery of how they wanted to do things, but the technology wasn't there yet to be able to do these things. And so the Matrix required development of technology for no money. But the lovely Bob Daly and Terry Semel at the time gave us almost an unrealistic green light budget. If you can make the movie for $65 million, we'll make the movie. And it was like, how do you make this movie for $65 million? The Matrix, with bullet time dodging bullets and helicopters and things and physical training, and Lawrence Fishburne and Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss and all these people. How do you do this? Well, I had the advantage of doing 2 television movies in Australia. And by gosh, they had a film incentive. And the film incentive was kind of a tax incentive where it was called a sale and lease back. You sold the copy. The copyright was carried by an Australian company who could sell it for a tax credit, and then we leased back the copyright that reverted to us after a while. Anyway, it turns out Australia would give us 25% of our production budget, both above and below the line. So we said, we can do this movie in Australia. You're crazy. You can't do this in Australia. It's like they don't have the resources. They don't have the crew. And I go, oh, yes, they do. And unfortunately, if we're going to be able to do this in Australia, you get to take one American crew member because the rest all your department heads have to be Australian.
Wow.
Including your costume designer, your production designer. They all have to be Australian. It's just impossible. So let's go to Australia. Let's meet a bunch of people. Let's go to Fox Studios, Australia, in Sydney. They had just created the studio in Sydney. Because remember, they were owned by an Australian named Rupert Murdoch, so they had built out a studio. We were the first picture to be produced at Fox Studios. Warner Brothers was the first movie to be produced at Fox Studios in Sydney, and we did it.
So who was the American who got the golden ticket?
Bill Pope, the cameraman, the
DP.
The DP.
It's always the DP.
They wanted Bill.
Yeah.
He had done the only movie that they had actually done, which was called Bound, which was a very small movie, claustrophobic movie. They hired Owen Patterson to do their production design. Yeah. They hired Kim Barrett to do costumes, which were brilliant. The production design was brilliant. Owen and Kim went on to do 10 movies with the Wachowskis. Funny how that happens.
Yeah.
But we did it, and we did the movie for $65 billion net dollars. At the time, we took advantage of, this is what a head of production does. We took advantage that the Australian dollar was valued at 55 cents on the American dollar. So remember, we're an American company. So if we spent $1, I got to stretch it because I got an extra 45 cents.
Yes.
Then we got a production incentive. So if we made the movie for $90 million for Warner Brothers, it was only $65 million. And we got the green light, and we actually did the movie, and we came pretty close to coming in on budget. We came a smooch over.
Wow. That's impressive.
Developed what was called bullet time in a digital environment at that point that had never been done before, and that was an array of still cameras that were in succession, catching an object in flight, and it was boom, 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 a series of still cameras to create bullet time, which is when he was dodging the bullets.
No, that's iconic.
It was an animate object being captured. It's iconic.
Yeah.
It was, and then it was overused like anything else.
Well, yes, but
the wire work, the fighting. We hired a troupe of wire acrobats from China that the Wachowskis had seen one of their shows, which was a Chinese acrobatic show, and hired these wire experts that could do all those, make Keanu Reeves spin around and lift him up off the ground, spin him around in midair, and do all that stuff. And all we had to do was digitally remove the wires. And they were artists, choreographers, artists. It was a one film that unbelievable that the cast was so dedicated that they actually trained for 6 months and did all their own stunts. They had
That's incredible. It's unheard of.
They had to.
Nowadays.
Cameras right on them.
Yeah.
Keanu Reeves was hurt doing it in the process. He hurt.
Well, and there wasn't, the technology with visual effects you couldn't replace the face of the actor on the, body of a stunt person.
Not a chance.
You had to use the actual person.
Had to be them, and
to
they
buy
were
it,
in physical training.
Yeah.
With the wire experts, with the acrobats, with the bodybuilders, with the whole thing for 6 months. They trained for that picture.
Incredible.
And that's never done, right? I mean, sure, we made Brad Pitt look like an Adonis on Troy. I mean, God, you see Brad Pitt in Troy and you go, oh my God, no guy looks like that.
No, that's a god.
That was, he was a god.
Yeah.
And that was not digitally altered. It was Brad Pitt. And you just went, oh my God.
No, I need to rewatch that.
I mean,
thanks.
crazy. You go back and look at Troy and you
it's
look
incredible.
and you go, oh my God, that's Brad Pitt.
It's a real human.
Yeah, a real human being that looks
gracing
like
us
that
with
and doing that,
yeah,
doing the stunt work and the leaping and the
yeah.
sword work and all that, training and training and training. So movie making can be frustrating. It can be uh, uh, full of pit with anxiety because you want it to work. You have responsibility, fiduciary responsibility, and it's hard to do these things for all the dollars because the best laid plans of mice and men don't always work. But it's the most exciting part of it's actually
When it
making
works.
the movie.
And when it works, it's I think it's a small miracle for every movie that
Yes.
gets made, no matter the scope of it, because the amount of people that have to come together and collaborate, and the amount of steps involved, even before a green light, there's just such a world,
Oh,
a
absolutely.
movie within the movie, before it even hits the screens for
Well,
people
we've
to
had plenty
see.
of films that
It's really
were up to green light and didn't like the direction or the artistic
yeah.
approach to it, where the director got bounced and you redeveloped it with another director
Yeah,
who took it to a different level and made that movie, and it was wildly successful.
yeah.
And if you did it with the first director, not a chance would that film have worked. Their vision
Yeah.
was not the right vision, or it certainly didn't feel that way
Mhm.
to the group. I had the benefit of, in the theatrical side,
Right.
being a part of our green light committee at Warner Brothers. So I sat in while everybody chimed in, marketing, creative, distribution, home video, everybody chimed in on a presentation. And we'd have a separate meeting or a luncheon, and we'd talk about the film and what it would cost and how you would market it and what you would do and where you would put it in the schedule and what the films were up against it. And that was a decision, and you'd give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And movies were made and not made in those meetings. I do find that Warner Brothers, for most of my career, were it kind of was it was an inbred that I think Bob Daly and Terry Semel brought to the company, that you didn't dwell on your failure, but you certainly celebrated your success. And we had more success than failure. I found Universal to be the opposite when I went over there. They dwelled on their failure and were loath to celebrate success.
Well, life is all about what you focus on.
Isn't that interesting?
Right.
And I did love the television people I worked with. We were really kind of knocking it out of the box. I then became somewhat responsible for some of USA television. We started they threw home video at me. So the first year I was there, I was stimulated, and it was really great, and it was new and fresh and new people, and it was like a rebirth, right?
Yeah.
And about 4 months, I think, 4 or 5 months into my tenure, my second year, the studio was sold to Seagram's. Lou Wasserman was ceremoniously let go. Sid Sheinberg was let go, and Seagram's were bringing in all new people. And I'm a 20-something year veteran now, 26-year veteran in this business, been through a ton of corporate changes. The writing was kind of on the wall for me. This is not working. I found myself meeting with way too many consultants from the Booz Allen Hamilton and all these Harvard MBAs about how to run a film company and how much the profit should be and why are we doing this and why are we doing that. And I remember a very nice, very bright woman came into my office one day and she goes, "Steve, I think I may have an answer for how you stay on budget in television." And I said, "Please, God, I've been doing this forever. How do you do it?" And she said, "Well, you budget, I don't know, 4,500 feet of film a day. And so when they use up all their film, they're done." I said, oh, shit, why didn't I think of that? Now get out of my office. What am I supposed to do? Put half of a television show on the air? Sure, we budget it, and the expectation is that's what you'll use in a day, but not everything goes the way it's supposed to go. Yeah. And so I'm going to send everybody home once we burn 4,500 feet of film. Get out of my office. In any event, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. Lucky because I had good people I used to work with at Warner Brothers. And during my exit interview with Bob Daly, he said, you're an idiot for leaving. You're letting your pride get the best of you because of the Lorimar, the relationships and all that. And don't sign a long-term deal because we have some things we might want to do with you. And I thought that's really sweet, but it's all yak and talk. And thank you, Mr. Daly. And so I went over there. So anyway, some of my old pals at Warner Brothers said, how you doing? I said, I'm like miserable here. It's like, this is doomsday for Universal. This, I don't mind saying this on a microphone and to your audience, the people that bought this company have no idea how to run a film studio. And they're not really listening.
Not interested in it either.
They're not listening to the smart people. They fired the smart people. So anyway, I get a call one day from an individual at Warner Brothers. Said, look, how long is your contract over there? And I said, I've got 2 more years on my contract. He goes, that's too bad. I said, why? What's going on? He said, well, can't really talk about it, but, if there was a way that you could get out of your contract, Warner Brothers would love to talk to you, but we can't while you're under contract because, we have no corporate rating. And I said, fine. I said, I don't even know who to talk to around here anymore. They fired everybody. So one individual was brought on by Seagram's to be chief legal counsel, who I knew. I actually knew him through my family. And he was a very wonderful attorney. And so I called him and said, look, been a while. I talked to you, but let's go have lunch one day. He said, great, I'd love to have lunch. So we go out and have lunch. And I said, can I get out of my contract? So what are you talking about? You can't get out of your contract. These guys love you here. They want to put you on a re-engineering committee and a whole thing. And I go, I'm really hating this because I'm just talking to efficiency experts. I'm not able to do what I do in my real life. And he said, well, who's going to let you out of your contract? I said, you are. You're the head of legal at this studio. And he goes, I guess I can do that, can't I? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, what is it? And I said, well, some people want to talk to me about another opportunity that may be something that's much, much better for me. And he goes, and it's just talk, right? And I said, yeah. Yes, you have permission. So I called and I said, I have permission. So I went in and I met with the Warner Brothers people, and they said, we want to make some changes in theatrical. Do you think you could do movies? You've been doing television all your life. Do you think you can do movies? And I said, yeah. I did tons of miniseries. I did tons of movies for television. I love it. I said, well, it's a little bit different. You need to convince Terry Semel that you can do movies, so you got to talk with him because he's a little leery that it's television, and truthfully, it's the producer's medium versus a director's medium. And theatrical is truly a director's medium. The producers are there. They're there to collaborate. They're there to put their foot down a little bit, but it's still a director's medium. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot different dynamic. And so I said, yes, I wanted to do this all my life. And talked to Terry, and he said, I'm going to give it a shot. If you can get out of Universal, we'll make you head of theatrical production. And they had a head of theatrical production at the time who I'd worked with as a television producer. And I said to Terry, I want to convince Bill to stay with me and be my teammate. And he said, if you can do that, it'd be wonderful. because we love Bill, but it's just outgrown him.
Mm.
And I said, fine. So I went back to Howard, and I said, Howard, I want out. I have this chance to make movies, and I wanted to make movies all my life, and that chance doesn't exist at Universal. Can you let me out of my contract? And he said, yeah, we'll let you out.
So 50 years.
Yeah.
And now you're retired.
49 and a half.
49 and a half.
I didn't want to work 50 years.
You didn't want to work 50.
No.
So
I said,
40.
I don't want to work 50 years. I've been retired 1 year now.
How has that gone? And what is next?
It's great. I miss the people. What I didn't want was to turn into that grumpy old man, that person that's seen it all, said it all, done it all, and when some really nice, wonderful, enthusiastic young director came in to say how he wanted to do something, I didn't want to be the guy to say, are you crazy? We did that and it didn't work. I just didn't want to be that guy. I think I've been a positive influence. I think that my relationship with the filmmakers were wildly important to me and important to them. I did all of Chris Nolan's movies. He would meet with me with his concept or have me read a script while I was eating a sandwich in his living room, and then ask me what did I think and how would we do this movie. I did 20 movies with Clint Eastwood. Consummate filmmaker, the best guy, the best filmmaker, conscientious, talented, easy to work with. The toughest were those Wachowskis, and I have a wonderful relationship with them. And I mean tough. And
you got to touch the careers of many visionaries, like many filmmakers who will sort of be in the textbooks of filmmaking for years and years to come and be studied. So what an incredible experience you've had. And to me, and obviously only knowing you for these 2 hours we've been talking, there is this feeling I get from you that you have managed to go through all of that in 49 and a half years and maintain your integrity. Keeps you self-aware enough to be the guy that leaves before you become that cynical person. What is the secret?
Passion. So absolute passion.
And what do you love about it?
I just loved being part of that creative, wonderful process of making movies and being able to sit with an audience and have them in rapture with the product that you help put up on that screen. And so if you can bring that to people, come on.
What a life worth living.
We're doing it.
Right? We're doing it. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.